right, thanks so much everyone for taking your seats and getting ready for our final panel of Washington Weekend 2024. We can give that a small round of applause. I'm really excited to be introducing our last group of panelists. And again, I've said this a few times, but thank you to our audience for your attention and enthusiasm and all of your questions throughout the weekend. It's just been very deeply appreciated, I'm sure, by your fellow fellows and also by our Pulitzer Center team. Once we end, please do stick around for our ending announcements. We're also going to take a group photo, so I'll be back, at the end to share all that information. Please stick around. Don't sprint out of here or anything. That said, I'm very excited to introduce these panelists and to hear from them about their reporting projects. On our final panel, we have Samiha Syed from Benedictine University, Julianna Deutscher from Johns Hopkins University, Emma Janssen from the University of Chicago, Josiah Farrell from Westchester Community College, and Ella Gonzales from Texas Christian University. So Samiha, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you so much. I feel like there's so much energy in the room that I should probably start off with a let's give it up again for 2024. Awesome, thank you guys. All right, so good morning. My name is Samiha Syed, and I am Benedictine University's first Pulitzer Center reporting fellow. Truly an honor. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you. My project focuses on Illinois as a sanctuary state. A sanctuary state, by definition, has policies in place which actually prevent state resources from being used to enforce federal immigration laws and restrict cooperation with ICE detainers. For example, in Illinois, the 2017 Trust Act prohibits law enforcement from detaining individuals solely based on their immigration status, or ICE detainer requests without a valid warrant, ensuring local police and sheriff departments do not act as federal immigration agents. The 2018 Voices Act requires law enforcement agencies to assist human trafficking survivors in seeking relief and applying for UNT visas in Illinois. Lastly, the 2019 Keep Family Together Act prevents local law enforcement from entering into agreements with ICE to enforce federal immigration law. Policy efforts such as these endeavors to promote trust between immigrant communities and local authorities while limiting cooperation with federal immigration law enforcement. Now, let's talk about some statistics. So this is my first slide. Again, my title is Interdependence and Conflict, Sanctuary in Illinois. The UNHCR reports 23.7 million Afghan refugees, over half of the population, including women and girls, are in need of humanitarian aid. Similarly, there are 3.3 million people displaced within Myanmar, and 16.7 million Syrian refugees also in need of humanitarian aid. The sheer number of refugees around the world is staggering, yet their individual stories go unheard. It's easy to feel disconnected from their plight when they remain faceless and their voices unheard in the global narrative. Many are displaced in extremely vulnerable and life-threatening, grave conditions and face human rights violations on a daily basis. Their stories must be told. Their strife, their survival, resilience, and hope. But they need platforms such as this for their voices to be amplified, bring attention to the human experience behind the term refugee. After all, what is a refugee? Now, if we as a global community strive to support refugees, and in doing so stabilize access and facilitate access to education, then we are able to empower these children and the world to essentially have these children use their unique gifts, their lens, their history, their stories, to create positive change. Their capacity for love and care, when nurtured, grows exponentially, from touching hearts to sparking positive change. I've seen this firsthand in these children at Fora, Forging Opportunities for Refugees in America, a 501c3 nonprofit in Chicago. where I was able to actually interview students who are at the center, who engage in their leadership development and empowerment activities, and who are offered high-impact tutoring. Now, when we invest in children's growth, we ignite a ripple effect of compassion and progress, demonstrating their actions, voices, and visions for the future. Now, for example, let's talk about Lana. Lana is the Syrian girl who is an absolutely high achiever at Fora, whose family fled a war-torn homeland, as you all would know, yet they must repay the cost of their flight tickets to safety back to the US government, and that has been immensely difficult for their family. Lana dreams of a world where everyone accepts and respects each other, where people are truly interested in and love each other's cultures. Lana envisions a place where people are simply kind and nice to each other. Now imagine a world like that. Wouldn't that be something? Hence, once again, I talk about the potential that these children have. That leadership lens, it just inspires me so much. Now, Mo is a Rohingya girl who, after enduring the trauma and horrors of religious persecution, and today now aspires to end poverty. A lofty goal, but truly inspiring. She dreams of a world where people let go of the hate and resentment they carry, understanding that hate is something learned and not innate. And then, once again, at our core, we are all human, more alike than we are different. Asal is an Afghan girl, again, her quote is on the screen, whose mother was tragically sold in Afghanistan. Yet Asal persevered to be the first of her family to attend college here in the United States. First gen, amazing. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Mo. So I mentioned her a little bit earlier. Now let's just read her quote so everyone can hear in her own words. Her dreams. I dream of a world without poverty. I want to build houses and schools for people suffering back in Burma so people there can experience what I've experienced here in the US. Because we are all human and we all deserve to be educated. Now, where did I find these girls? I found them at Fora, which I mentioned earlier. Fora is truly a beacon of hope in the global stage when it comes to refugee education, refugee rights, and empowerment. For example, in Fora, there's a prayer room, a room where these children, who otherwise would probably be hesitant to talk about their worshiping needs or their religious needs, who are then able to go to this room and pray. There's also an ablution room where they're able to engage in the process of ablution, which otherwise they would have to do in the bathroom, which you may have seen people put their feet in the sink. Maybe a Muslim person, maybe someone that looks like me. And you may be confused, like, what is that? Well, that's ablution. And in order to pray, people need to do that. And these children were offered these facilities where they can feel not just at home within the center, but also empowered enough to share to other people. Tutors joyfully talk to them about their needs. They're like, hey, tell me more about that. That's really cool. We need more of that in our world. Now, Fora sees the spark, the flame, the potential in these children, and it nurtures them through leadership development and empowerment programs such as Girl Up, robotics, Model United Nations, speech and debate. They have actually competed on the world stage with students who really are absolutely incredible. For example, the children of Yale alumni and other areas, because these programs are tied to really renowned organizations. Now, serving as a much needed example of amplifying refugee voices in global discourse, this is my project in a nutshell. Fora, the 501c3 nonprofit, Mo, Asal, Lana, as you had heard. Now, if you want to hear more, read my articles. Alrighty, I'd like to end my presentation with a poem I wrote, which I thought may be telling and which may help drive some key points home on the global refugee narrative. Here we go. An ode to the purest of dignitaries, the children of the earth, of the coast, of the bank, of the border, of the island, of the sea, of the mountains, land, and sky, bearing the dream of peace, forging through a world unbeknownst to them, displaced, yes, within themselves, together with grace, resilience, and serenity. Their eyes speak of seeking refuge, yet aspiring to create sanctuary, glimmering with hope, wonder, and enchantment. They passionately learn, they strive, they thrive. And it is not a tragedy from which they rise and succeed, nor ashes from which they emerge. It was within them all along. the power to be a beacon. The struggles they faced fuel their commitment to spreading joy, as you guys know. The joy of bright, beautiful, transcending light of the earth, of the coast, of the border, of the bank, of the sea, of the island, of the mountains, land, and sky. Sanctuary. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. My name is Julianna, and I'm here from the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins, and I'll be presenting on the Venezuelan migration crisis response in Brazil, specifically looking at building resilience against human trafficking. So I realize that many of you might already be very much aware of the situation that is ongoing in Venezuela, but just to remind us of some of the numbers. So over 7.7 million refugees and migrants have left Venezuela since 2014. This is the result of extreme socioeconomic crisis that has been ongoing since President Nicolas Maduro took charge of the country in 2013. And when I say this, I mean low wages, high unemployment, food shortages, medication shortages, lack of essential services, high inflation, and increasing violence. Now, many of you may also be aware that in July, Venezuela had an election. And in this, Maduro was yet again proclaimed the victor. Now, many investigations have gone on to say that this was likely a fraudulent outcome. And as a result, neighboring countries are already seeing a major increase in the number of Venezuelans that are now choosing to leave the country yet again. So where does my story fit within this? So I actually traveled to this region in Brazil, so in the north here, the Roraima province, 2 years ago, and that was part of a research investigation partnered with the International Organization for Migration as part of the UN. So in this, we asked participants to share stories about the experiences specifically of women and girl Venezuelan migrants and refugees. In this, we did not ask them to disclose experiences of violence or human trafficking, but out of the over 9,000, yes, 9,000 stories that we collected across Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil in 9 different locations, over 1,000 of these stories chose to voluntarily disclose experiences of sexual exploitation and human trafficking. So I could very much tell you a story about the very traumatizing themes that came out of these over 1,000 stories, but I promised myself that if I ever had the opportunity to travel to this region again, that wasn't the lens that I wanted to take. And I will say, it's very important that we do report on these types of crises, but the lens that I think needs to be shared is actually one of resilience and strength in this community. So something that was really unique that I experienced when I was in Brazil 2 years ago was a lot of initiatives that are not being done in other humanitarian settings. So some of the things that I witnessed is that in the refugee camps on the border from Brazil to Venezuela, there's actually gender-neutral washrooms. We don't even have these in the hospitals where I work in Canada, and yet we have them in these refugee camps in Brazil. There was also a camp that was specific for Indigenous refugees and migrants, where instead of sleeping on cots or on the ground, they were provided their traditional hammocks and provided a space to traditionally cook their food. Their children were able to go to school in their own language. So I think this is something that needs to be shared so that we can hopefully inspire other countries to take similar approaches. And particularly, they had a lot of programs about building resilience for those who had experienced gender-based violence and human trafficking. Now, I have not yet returned to Brazil. I will be traveling a little bit later this year. And part of that is recognizing that in order to access some of these very kind of vulnerable spaces, so refugee camps, reception centers, it's important to be partnered with organizations such as NGOs or organizations within the UN. So I was able to reconnect with these teams from 2 years ago, but they were actually in the middle of responding to some floods in the south of the country, so we decided to postpone my travel. I have, however, been able to do some Zoom interviews with representation from a number of the organizations listed here. Now, I really like that Samiha had included some of the numbers about the global context, and so I do want to just kind of frame this in a global mindset. So right now, this is the largest number of forcibly displaced persons that we have ever recorded in human history. Keep in mind, this number also includes internally displaced, so those who have been forced to leave their homes but haven't necessarily left the border of their home country. So you might be kind of asking yourself, where does Venezuela fall within this? And I know that there has been increased media here in the States recently. I will say we're not seeing as much in Canada, and we're not seeing as much at a global level, despite having many Venezuelans arriving to Canada as well. So when you look at the numbers specifically of people who are refugees or in refugee-like situations, 3 in 4 refugees come from only 5 countries. Where does Venezuela fall within that? In the data from 2023, they actually had the 3rd largest number of refugees or people in refugee-like situations. So I don't know, maybe some of you are much more versed than I am in kind of global affairs, and you might have guessed that. But I think based on the volume of media content that we receive in Canada or some of the other settings where I work, I would have never thought that Venezuela falls so high. And so I think it's important as journalists, and I know that's why many of us are here kind of sharing those stories that are a little bit untold, but just keeping in mind that the volume of media about something can kind of shift where some of the funding goes or shift where our general global audience kind of perceives there being increased need. And so to kind of touch on that piece a little bit more, I will just say that the Norwegian Refugee Council has been doing a lot of reporting on the fact that there is an increasing gap in the funding that's needed to meet the increasing humanitarian need. So as of July this year, only 18% of funding needs have been met for the current complex humanitarian emergencies that the world is facing. And in 2023, over half of the funding only went to 5 complex humanitarian emergencies. And I'm not trying to say, that one emergency is more important than the other. That's not what I'm trying to display with these numbers. But I think, again, it's just important for us to kind of recognize that the media that is consumed by different people might shift where some of those funds are allocated. And that is something that in my reporting that I have been doing kind of virtually, that is a major theme that has come out with every person I have spoken to, is that a lot of the funding that was there when I was in the region in 2022 no longer exists. So what are 3 of the lessons that I've learned so far in my pre-reporting? So one is timing. And I forgot to mention all of these photos are photos that I had taken myself in the region 2 years ago. So this crisis has been ongoing for 10 years. But had I visited during the pandemic, this was actually one of the informal border crossings used from Venezuela to Brazil. So now the border is open post-pandemic, so this isn't the route that's used. And I think that just goes to show that the timing that we visit some of these kind of prolonged sort of crises, the story is going to change. And I know there was conversations in some of the earlier panels about what that kind of looks like. So now, again, I kind of made the decision to postpone my travel, and part of that is based on security as well. So recognizing that as a female traveler, I need to make sure that I'm partnered with organizations when I go to a region such as this. The other one is maintaining partnerships. So many of you have told stories about building fantastic friendships and partnerships in your communities. Hold on to those, because I know that the partnerships that I made 2 years ago are the reason that this project is now going to be possible for me to return. And finally, flexibility. So while I really want to show up later this year and hopefully still see those organizations that were there 2 years ago doing these amazing programs, I recognize that those might not exist anymore with these funding shifts. And so I'm keeping an open mind to kind of see what stories do present themselves. And with that, thank you so much.
That was amazing. Thank you. All right, everyone, I'm gonna get set up here. This is a Kurdish scarf, and I'm wearing another one, so I just wanted to show those. It is, bless you, it is relevant to my presentation, as you will soon see. And setting myself a stopwatch. All right. So my name is Emma Janssen. I graduated from the University of Chicago in June, and I'm currently a political journalist at the American Prospect, which is based here in DC. My story for the Pulitzer Center is on the Kurdish diaspora in Western Europe, and more specifically in the Netherlands, which is where my family is from. I'm a dual Dutch and US citizen, so this is an issue that does affect me and the country that I am a citizen of. So first, a quick note on the photos. I'm sharing photos from the Kurdish festival, the Kurdish Culture Festival in Frankfurt, Germany. I was once told by a photojournalist who I really admire that photos can tell a parallel or sort of co-story to your larger story. And the story that I am telling through words is about transnational repression of the Kurdish diaspora community. And that is a story of violence, assassinations, and repression linguistically, culturally, etc. So I wanted to show a bit of kind of joy and cultural unity through my photos as that co-narrative. So briefly, and I really empathize with Randy's presentation earlier, I'm going to try to tell a very complex historical story to you all. So Kurds are an ethnic group based in the Middle East, and they live kind of in the region of, at the intersection of many Middle Eastern countries. So that would be Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Iraq primarily, but there are also Kurdish populations in countries like Armenia. And they are a stateless people, and that has been a major source of conflict and activism within the Kurdish community to get a state, and if not a state, some other form of political representation and agency. And given their statelessness, and also given conflict and repression in the states where Kurds live, there is a very large diaspora outside of the region of Kurdistan, including in Europe, in Western Europe, and in the Netherlands. So that's where I went. I went to the Netherlands, and I also went to Germany, as these photos show. And I was brought to this story because around a decade ago, there were some tragic and pretty exemplary incidents in Western Europe that show the extent of this repression in the diaspora. So in Paris, I believe it was in 2013, 3 Kurdish female activists were assassinated at a Kurdish community center by a man who was later found to have ties to MIT, which is essentially the Turkish version of the CIA. Then later, a year later, in the Netherlands, the Dutch government raided some Kurdish community centers that were just literally that, community centers, where people could go speak the language together, wear a Kurdish dress, eat Kurdish food. And the justification was that they were worried that these community centers were hosting terrorist activity, specifically citing the PKK, which is labeled as a terrorist organization by the US, the EU, the UK. They are a group of Kurds that are fighting for a state, or at least an end to what they see as the occupation by states like Turkey, Iraq, Syria, but mostly Turkey, I would say, in this case. So the Turkish state has made it part of their mission to eliminate the PKK. Something more recent that gets at the repression of Kurdish communities in Europe is actually Sweden's desire to ascend into NATO. So very recently, this year, Sweden wanted to join the alliance, and it turns out that everyone in the alliance must approve the ascension of new members. Turkey is the second largest military in NATO, second only to the United States. And Turkey essentially blocked Sweden's ascension, saying that Sweden was too sympathetic to terrorists like the PKK and needed to crack down more on its Kurdish communities within the country. Sweden eventually made some deals with Turkey, and Erdogan approved Sweden's ascension into NATO. So this is an example of a Western European state that is essentially using its Kurdish population, a very vulnerable population that consists of many political refugees, as pawns for its own geopolitical gains. And this is something that I think is relatively underreported, given just how horrible it is. I wanted to also briefly explain why I'm telling this story, because I'm not Kurdish. I am a Dutch citizen, and Kurds have been relatively underreported in international media, given the degree of their statelessness and of their political repression across the world, both in their home countries and region and in places like Europe, like the Netherlands. Kurds are also targeted for their activism and for their journalism to a very significant extent in states like Iran and Turkey specifically really stand out. So as a Dutch citizen, I feel a lot safer, and a US citizen, I feel a lot safer and more able to do this reporting without that kind of repression from those countries. So that's one reason. Also, I have a stake in this because when the Dutch government decides to crack down on Kurdish communities, that's my government doing it potentially in the name of, my safety or the safety of other Dutch citizens. So that's something that I don't stand with or stand for. So this, like I said, these are all shots from a Kurdish cultural festival, and something that really struck me at this festival was the amount of booksellers. So you could, of course, go get Kurdish food. I was gifted this Kurdish scarf. I bought this Kurdish scarf. But also, there were booksellers everywhere. Almost every other stand was full of books in translations of political theory and of literature into Kurdish languages like Sorani or Kurmanji, into Turkish, which many Kurds speak, and into some European languages like German, French, Dutch. So one of the stories that I want to write is a little bit about the significance of books, literature, political philosophy and theory within the Kurdish community and within the Kurdish diaspora, because I could talk about it for hours, and please ask me questions about it or find me later. I can give recommendations as well. So another thing that I really reflected on from my reporting was the importance of language skills. A lot of older Kurds in diaspora will only speak Kurdish languages, specifically Kurmanji, at least in the communities that I was visiting. I spent a year studying Sorani, which is the southern Kurdish dialect. So I could do a little bit of kind of understanding of Kurmanji, but not as much as I wanted to. I have some Turkish language skills and, of course, some Dutch, so those were also helpful. But language skills are always kind of at the forefront of my mind when doing this sort of reporting. And I also wanted to share some things that I think could be potential solutions to this issue. I think Western governments need to do better at not taking the word of states like Turkey or Iran, Iraq, Syria, etc., on face value when they're speaking about Kurdish diaspora communities. They need to do their own research and make their own judgments and not just raid community centers. They also need to do a better job protecting those community centers, like we saw in Paris with the tragic assassination. That should not be happening on foreign soil. And then I think more things like this cultural festival. This is a family having a picnic by the lake in Germany. More spaces for culture to be shared is, I think, incredibly important. So I have more work to be doing, but I hope you'll read my stories and ask me questions. I'm happy to share more. Thank you.
I don't need this. Good morning, everyone. Okay, so my name is Josiah Farrell. I'm from the beautiful Twin Islands of Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm representing Westchester Community College today. Quick question. How many of y'all, by a show of hands, have heard about Ukraine and Russia? Okay, keep your hands up. Keep your hands up. What about Israel and Palestine? You can lower it down. What about Guyana and Venezuela? You can drop it. Okay, so I traveled to Guyana to report on how geopolitical instability is pushing migrants into Guyana. So there's a conflict over the Essecoba region, which is Guyana's richest region, has mining for gold and bauxite and oil and gas. So a little bit of history on the dispute. So the dispute is over the Essecoba region, and it has lasted for over 200 years. So this is one example of how colonialism has impacted the world and continues to impact the world. So the British colonial government determined the boundary line between the Republic of Venezuela and it was then British Guyana in 1840. Now, the Venezuelan government rejected the arbitral award of 1899, and since then there have been several commissions. They appointed someone called a good officer by the UN, and they were essentially tasked with assessing the situation and recommending a solution. Recently, Venezuela's President Maduro, he proposed a referendum to the population to see if they were willing, and we know how elections are in Venezuela, as you would have described, and they won the referendum. So it was essentially aimed at reasserting Venezuela's claim to the Essecoba region. Now, this is a picture of me on a speedboat, kind of like Indiana Jones, going up the Pomeroon River. And this is the Essecoba River. It's a very large river. I thought it was the ocean. And it's like filled with sediments and stuff. So on Guyana's standpoint, what I found was that if you ask a Guyanese diplomat, they'll refer to it as a territorial controversy and not a dispute. They believe that the dispute was already settled in Geneva, and therefore there's nothing to be disputed over. The opposition has supported the government so far, and Guyana has vowed to defend its territorial sovereignty. Now, Venezuela, on the other hand, so I had a meeting with the Chinese ambassador. He was also the director of the Foreign Services agency in Guyana. And I had a meeting with the Venezuelan ambassador to Trinidad. And he gave me this copy. So on the morning of the interview, he claimed that his phone was hacked and someone came outside and he gave me this. And it was basically like a lot of information on what Venezuela President Maduro would have sent over the years and stuff, like letters to the UN and stuff. Oh my God. Emma, you're hijacking my presentation. Okay, so they believe that Venezuela has indisputable titles to the Essecoba region. That is essentially it. And the diplomacy of peace is the only weapon of Venezuela. And it reiterates the claim to their Guyana. Now, the discovery of oil, Guyana first discovered oil through ExxonMobil in 2015. There are three main license holders, which are Hess, Exxon, and CNOCC. Now, if Venezuela do reclaim this land, it will take up, so from here is the Essecoba region. So these are offshore deposits of oil, and essentially, most of Guyana will be gone. Now, during my reporting, I also discovered, through interviews, that Suriname also claims the Berbice region, which is located, near here. So it's on both sides, they're being bullied. Now, the ambassador to China, Ronald Austin, he said that Guyana's discovery of oil has sharpened Venezuela's appetite for territorial conquest. It's a really nice pull quote. Now, the highest record of Venezuelan migrants was in 2019, which was actually the year that Guyana started extracting oil and stuff through Exxon and the other companies. Now, these numbers are only recorded by the immigration department. Obviously, if they're escaping passing through the border, not all of them would be recorded. So according to the International Organization for Migration, 53% of these immigrants are women. Now, I interviewed a professor. Her name is Corinne Jacobs-Chester. She's the director of the International Center for Migration and Diaspora Studies at the University of Guyana. She says that the influx of Venezuelans are putting a strain on the healthcare system, especially as Guyana is a developing country. But she said something that really struck out to me, that she was like, it's the 21st century and people need to change their attitudes when it comes to migration. She said that most Venezuelans aren't necessarily taking any jobs from Guyanese citizens, and that it was a myth. Most Venezuelans in Guyana, they work in the informal sector selling hot dogs, barbering, and construction, which you'll hear about later on. So the story of Javier. Now, you may be wondering why I have a picture of Georgetown. That is not Javier. But the average Venezuelan in Guyana, they're fearful of speaking out against the Venezuelan regime. And one person I interviewed, the first lady I interviewed, it was random. She gave me the name Jenny Carolina. I said to myself, that's most likely a fake name. So Javier, he moved to Guyana 3 years ago for a better life. He works at a popular pharmacy in Georgetown. And he said, like, his family members, they aren't able to get work permits and stuff. So, in terms of like being hired in the oil and gas industry, it's not really possible. But he says the children and the family are able to get education and learn a new language, which is good. Okay, so some field observations. I mentioned that the average Venezuelan in Guyana is reluctant to speak about the Venezuelan government. And migrants living in Guyana receive little to no assistance from the government. Now, Guyana is experiencing rapid infrastructural development thanks to the discovery of oil. And what it's doing is it has open doors for Venezuelans to be employed in the construction sector. Guyana's oil and gas isn't the only natural resource being threatened, but also forestry, gold, and bauxite. So this is like a family that they set up their own hot dog stand in Guyana. And over there, you'll see like the boats that we took to go across to the Essecobo region. So this is my project, and thank you for listening.
Thanks. My gosh, we made it, you guys. Last one. I think I'm short enough to... Okay, perfect. Can everyone hear me? All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Gonzales. I'm the Texas Christian University representative. And, I got the pleasure of spending 2 weeks in Poland this summer reporting on Ukrainian women that were fleeing from war zones in Ukraine. So let's just hop right in. First, I just want to show a little context. I made this presentation in September, but as of September 25th, 2024, this is the most recent map of Russian-occupied territories. So I'm going to be talking about 3 different women today, and 2 of them are from these eastern territories. One is from western Ukraine, but she actually served in eastern Ukraine. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit of context. These women were traveling all the way from eastern Ukraine to Warsaw or Krakow, Poland, and they were not flying. They had to travel by land because Ukraine's air travel is closed due to the war. So starting off with Kamila Kosenko, she is our military veteran. She fought in Mykolaiv, Donbass, Crimea, anywhere you can imagine. She's seen it all. And she fled to Poland because she is not just thinking about her life. She had a 5-year-old son, and she wanted him to grow up in a normal kindergarten with friends and live a somewhat normal life. So she fled to Poland. And one really interesting thing that I didn't expect to find here is that Kamila found her own history in Poland. So she's the woman that's from more of Western Ukraine, but since Western Ukraine and Eastern Poland used to share land before the Soviet Union, she's been able to find manuscripts from the 15th and 16th century about her hometown in Ukraine. So she's been able to find some genealogy, and while Russia's burning evidence of Ukrainian culture and history back in her hometown, she is able to kind of rewrite that herself in Krakow, Poland, which is super inspiring and a nice silver lining story to know that, you know, some people are finding more of their identity as a Ukrainian, although being displaced and in a foreign country. The next woman I want to touch on is Svetlana Synastia. She's 41, and she is from an eastern region in Ukraine, Torez. I'm going to read this quote. "The last time I was in Torez in 2013, because in 2014 Russian troops entered the Donbas area and war began. To my great sorrow, the war deprived me of the opportunity to see my relatives, but I hope that this horror will end soon and I'll be able to visit my hometown again." So this is kind of a unique story because she actually left to Poland in 2016, and she was able to travel to Poland with her husband. It was at a time when men were able to leave the country, and she was pregnant. So they've been living in Poland for 6 years now, and she is just now able to get back on her feet and enter the workforce and kind of start her career, even though she was a very high acclaimed accountant back in Ukraine. So this is a picture of her in a business class. It's a business class taught in Polish, so Ukrainian women can go learn how to market themselves and interview themselves to foreign people, and at the same time they're learning Polish, because in Poland to get a job you need to know Polish, even though English is the common language between Poles and Ukrainians. So yeah, it has taken her 6 years to be able to do that again, but to her, she's kind of using her career as a healthy distraction and a way to cope with war. The last woman that I want to talk about is Alla Diagleva. She's 52, and she was a history teacher in Ukraine, and she is now a history teacher to Ukrainian refugee children. She stays at a center that's operated by Project Hope, which is a refugee agency, a global refugee agency. And she definitely had the most traumatic story that I learned. Her husband and son are still fighting front lines in Kherson. That's where she's from. That was one of the first cities to fall to Russia back in 2014. And yeah, she shared with me about buildings, libraries, institutions being burned to the ground, any evidence of Ukrainian culture being disintegrated, and at certain points there were no food or water. She told me that the only water they had was from the sky, the rainwater. And one thing she told me now, she moved to Poland not because she wanted to, but simply because she had to. She needed a safer place to live. And she says, when I teach kids, I don't have to think about war. So again, she's kind of using her career as a healthy distraction. I went through this a lot faster than I thought, but I want to wrap up on just a mini field note. One of my reporting takeaways that you kind of have seen as a common theme in this presentation is that Ukrainian women have been using their careers as a distraction and motivation. One thing I didn't realize was that during just 50 years ago, when the Soviet Union ruled over Ukraine, therapy or going to see a psychologist was only for the mentally crazy. So now all Ukrainians associate therapy with being crazy or mentally ill, and it's a very negative connotation. But really, none of these people should know how to be war prisoners. All of these people need grief counseling and help navigating the trauma of war. And so instead of doing therapy, a lot of them are finding ways to keep busy and keep themselves distracted. So for Alla and Svetlana, it was their careers. For Camilla, it's history and genealogy. Something that surprised me was that many Ukrainians are finding more history about their culture in Poland than they would back home. And another theme that I found was a lot of them said that they realized their identity more as a Ukrainian now that the war has started. They've really had to dig into their roots. And one thing I found about Ukrainians is they are very strong. They will not back down. They won't just sit back and cry about war, but they're going to do something for themselves to make themselves feel better and help their culture and country out. And then the challenge I encountered was taking photos felt invading at moments. I thought for sure sitting down with people was going to be a lot more intimidating and having them open up to me. And I thought taking pictures would
feel a little bit better hiding behind the lens and taking photos from afar, but really I found that when I sat down with people, I was connecting with them emotionally. It was way easier to peel back their layers, and when I was taking photos, it felt very invading. It felt like I was exposing these women's stories. And then finally, an unexpected triumph. Language barrier had no effect on communication. Like I said earlier, the common language between Poles and Ukrainians is English, so that was definitely to my advantage, but obviously there's still a little bit of disconnect. But luckily, emotionally, I laughed with these women, I cried with them, we joked, we ate and drank together, and it was just an incredible experience. I still keep in touch with them today. And that's Julia in the top photo, and then Camilla, who I told you about, we went to an arcade in the bottom photo. So yes, thank you so much. Huh? The phone. Oh. Sorry, I was like,
All right, one more round of applause for our final panel. Would any of our panelists like to ask questions of one another? I see Emma is nodding. Please go ahead. I think it'll turn on.
It'll
Yeah,
turn
keep
on.
going.
Okay, hi. I have a question for Samiha and Ella. Both of you focused on women and girls, at least to a certain extent or entirely. And can you tell me why that is and why gender was important to tell alongside kind of larger stories about displacement? Sure. So I will say that I think it's really important to consider that when we are talking about refugees, when we're talking about any kind of vulnerability, oftentimes we learn that women often face the brunt of it due to whether it be cultural norms or other reasons. So that was a key issue, but also I feel that having worked within the refugee center, so I actually had deep connections with this center in particular, I had encountered really interesting stories about these children in an informal setting. So I wanted to share it with the world, essentially. So that was part of it. And yeah, I mean, they're just so brilliant. Like some of them they're like 5 years old and they know 5 languages. And I'm just like, people need to know about you. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything Samiha said, but also 80% of Ukrainian refugees are women and children. So yeah, men are not allowed to leave the country at the moment. They are forced to stay, and they're either hiding or they're fighting. And so it really, I guess, wasn't a choice for me, but also I think that, like Samiha said, they are the most vulnerable. Mm-hmm.
Other panelist questions? Cool. We can also go to our audience. Yeah, Ariana?
I had a question for Ella. I was just wondering how you found your sources and got connected to them.
Yeah, I actually found them through different organizations and nonprofits. So I used Project Hope, like I mentioned, and then UNHCR as well. And then this project actually came upon me because my sophomore year of college, I had the opportunity to report on Ukrainian refugees in the Dallas area. And so IRB had connections with local organizations that kind of put me in contact with people as well. So.
I saw you first, sorry. Audrey? Can you hear me or?
No.
Hello? Okay.
There you are.
Audrey, American University. This is for all of you or just anyone who wants to answer. It's a question that, I don't know, I've been thinking about a lot, and I feel like probably a lot of us throughout our reporting have thought about of, like, as we kind of negotiate the complex histories of the places that you guys are reporting on, how you think about, / if you do, like distilling those histories into like something that is understandable and gives context, but also like, I mean, probably a lot of us in this room have like a better understanding of like imperialism, colonialism. Like it wouldn't be shocking to like hear some of the things that like the American government has done in Latin America. But like might be shocking or surprising to readers, like how you write about that, how you think about that. I'm just curious.
I mean, Okay, thank you for your question. Um, I think like the historical context was really important. Initially, I thought it was just an oil dispute, but it wasn't that. And I didn't know that this dispute over this region was like over 200 years old. So you can't like bring I like this is just my personal view that you can't like bring like a story like that without like giving someone like some background on it. And like based on this document, like it's a lot of information here, and you just have to sort through all of it to like kind of break it down. In terms of like what I say is that for developing countries, such as like in the Caribbean and South America, you have to, like the US and Britain and these countries play a significant role because these are their only sources of protection. So since this conflict has happened, the British, they have had like a military presence in that region. So it's kind of like these countries kind of like protecting them, and I think I'll also include that aspect in my project. But yeah, thank you for your question. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, this is something I am also very much thinking about, especially because I haven't written my final drafts yet, so I am like actively deciding how I want to approach this. And I don't have a solution or an answer, but I have something I've been thinking about a lot, both for my reporting and for just reporting in general, this is a phrase my teacher taught me, so forgive the humanities speak, but chronopolitics or chronopolitics, like the politics of time and when you start your stories, right? Or when do you start the narrative, right? Like, do you start the narrative thousands of years in the past, maybe when identity groups, in the case of my story, were forming? Do you start your story, for telling stories about Kurds and Kurdistan? Do I start my story speaking about ethnic cleansing campaigns against them that caused a lot of the displacement? Do I start my story with more recent issues in the diaspora? So not an answer, but a complication is just, alongside giving context, I actually have to decide what even is the starting point of this. So yeah, food for thought.
I just wanted to add one more thing. So I will say that's a really interesting question, and just in general, there is so much information to be had and found, whether it be literature or professors or just people to be resources on colonialism, imperialism. But in general, I think a good way to really approach it is well, people take evidence and data points and stats as well, it's fact, so, but lacing that with history. For example, within the refugee center that I was talking about, a lot of the children were at the 25th percentile in their standardized math and reading test scores. And after high impact tutoring, they were at the 75th percentile. So taking that information and saying, hey, what does this mean? Break it down. 25th percentile, why was that the case? What were the resources that they were provided? And then vice versa for the 75th. So I feel lacing around, I guess, the context or the story in that way might be helpful. So just a thought.
Hi, my name's Rachel. I'm the University of Wisconsin fellow. I know a number of you guys worked with NGOs or similar nonprofits, and the question I had was how you guys went about starting to form those relationships, even maybe before you knew what your reporting idea was, over the course of, for some of you guys, years. How did you form those relationships, and what advice do you have for maybe other people in the room on how we could start to build those relationships even if we don't have intent to report there right now?
My advisor actually gave me amazing advice on this, especially for reporting on sensitive topics. I feel like your relationship with the source is vital. And she just told me that if they invite you to their home let them host you, eat the food they serve you, drink what they serve you. And so I really started once I got in Poland, I started by just meeting sources for a meal and getting to know them, and then we'd hop into an interview, maybe not even that day, but at least an hour or two into knowing each other. And then also, this is just like a silly little thing, but when reaching out to my sources, I always signed with a blue and yellow heart just to show my support like for Ukraine. So, yeah.
So I think part of it is just kind of understanding what different UN agencies exist and the different branches that they cover. So, for example, WHO is always going to be very specifically looking at health. So if you're doing a health topic, then you would be starting by reaching out to the country director, and then they can always put you in contact with the more kind of specific person on the tangent of health that you're tackling. UNHCR very specifically does refugee, although they are starting to cover a bit more of kind of migrants as well, just given that there's a lot of climate migrants and Venezuela, for example, that wouldn't necessarily meet the legal definition of refugee. And then IOM is kind of that overarching migration. So I think it's kind of, and then there's many kind of organizations beyond that. But I think once you kind of know what your specific sort of theme is going to be, then just making sure that you're reaching out to the appropriate branch within the UN. And I would typically recommend by starting with the country kind of director, and then they can always kind of connect you to the more specific targets. I know it might seem intimidating, but they're people just like us. So don't be shy to reach out, and also don't hesitate to send follow-up emails. So within that sector, it's quite common to not get replies for even several weeks, just as people are responding to different crises. So don't be afraid to just send a follow-up in a couple weeks.
I'm going to add something super briefly. Language learning is incredibly helpful. So before I even knew that I wanted to report on these issues, I just wanted to learn languages. So I studied Turkish, and I was able to meet people from Turkey, including Kurds who live in Turkey. And then I started studying Sorani Kurdish with a teacher from Iraqi Kurdistan. And the diaspora is a very tight-knit community. So from a lot of those connections, I was able to meet sources or just people who helped me out and helped crystallize the stories that I wanted to tell. There are also really good resources online for language learning from like conflict impacted teachers that I would recommend, because I think I'm going to start doing that maybe for Kurdish. But come find me and I can send websites because I forget the names, but I have them.
I guess I could add one more point. And I feel like at the heart of partnership is really being unfiltered and authentic. Because when you get in these spaces to interview people, they will be vulnerable and they will be sharing like their life stories with essentially a stranger. So tell them why you're passionate about this, because you are. Like, this is your project, this is your idea, this is something that you want to share with the world. So if you share that, I feel like that just opens the door to partnerships, not just in an email, but like any form of communication, whether it be a phone call, whether it be in person and visiting. If you just tell them why you're passionate, like that can open doors, because they can be like, hey, I connect with that. And I think that's the heart of partnership. So yeah.
Hi. As Emma said, our reporting projects had a lot of parallels, so I have a really interesting question for Emma that I didn't really get to delve into in my story because I was focusing on other things. But one thing I noticed, as you probably noticed as well, there's a lot of parallels between Palestinian struggle for statehood and Kurdish struggle for statehood. And something that made me incredibly sad and angry is that a lot of Palestinian stories are not being told, and everything is kind of being pushed away in a label of terrorism, and it makes me really sad. I remember in one of my interviews that I didn't get to include, a girl told me, like, I have to remember, كل العام بفكرون إنه إحنا إرهابيين بس أنا نساء فقط وكمان هاي أرضنا. So she says, like, all the world thinks we're terrorists, but I'm only a woman and this is our land. And so it made me really sad, and I'm just wondering if any of the Kurdish people you spoke to said that their stories are being pushed away because terrorist groups are taking up a lot of media attention, like you said, with Turkey doing a lot in the name of terrorist groups.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And to be honest, a lot of the people that I spoke to didn't specifically bring that issue up, but it is kind of just ever present in when you're speaking about Kurdish self-determination and livelihood. And I think the parallels are, like you said, really undeniable, and something that really stood out to me that was very visible at the Kurdish Cultural Festival that I went to in Germany is that, so this, I'm going to try to not have to do like a textbook explaining thing, but a very important leader of the kind of Kurdish self-determination movement is named Abdullah Öcalan, and he is in prison, in a Turkish like island prison. And a major source of unity in the diaspora and a huge issue in the diaspora is freeing him and negotiating for his freedom and the freedom of other Kurdish political prisoners, mostly in Turkey. And he is very much so labeled as a terrorist by Turkey, and so there's, I don't know, at the festival you just see a huge like resistance to that by people sharing his work, translating his books, talking about his theory, and talking about how Kurdish identity is about, you know, like food and dress and music and political self-determination. Another huge thing is that women's rights are like fundamental to Öcalan's philosophy and just kind of the philosophy of the Kurdish self-determination movement in general. And a lot of Kurdish female fighters or activists have been labeled as terrorists, including kind of by the US government, by the Turkish government. And they are constantly kind of either put in the label of being a terrorist, or they're kind of like fetishized as, look at these women, they're so strong and they're pretty. And so, you know, it's something that's ever present in any cultural organization you go to, is the people that states are labeling as terrorists are actually theorists and authors and community members and uncles. Like people call Öcalan Apo, which means uncle. So that redefining is really important.
Sorry, I just have a follow-up from earlier. Audrey. It was just making me think of like a lot of these are really kind of complex, controversial topics, and I'm wondering how you like go about researching like both the history and like the present day when, like, I don't know, everyone is speaking from somewhere and every history and story that is being told from somewhere, and how you like kind of disentangle the like why people are saying, like, portraying something in a particular way, and when do you trust it. And I don't know, I like kind of tend to like believe the people that I sympathize with more, but like things are wide.
I mean, it was really controversial, as you said, but I know, like, I wanted to hear from both sides, so on Venezuela's side as well as Guyana. So I decided, like, the best way to like find an unbiased person would be through an educational institution, like a professor or something that actually studied the topic, and that's when I reached out to Professor Corinne Jacobs. And she actually studied the same topic. And yeah, that's the approach that I took. I didn't want it to seem like too one-sided, because I had connections with the opposition and the government of Guyana. And, you know, you can't tell a story one-sided. Yeah.
Okay. Mine's actually probably not as controversial as the rest, but I feel like I still don't even know all the history. And one of the main reasons that I wanted to report on this was because I feel like the people weren't being reported on. It's just the terrors and horror of war. So I'm kind of take your question and flip it, but the thing that I really focused on history-wise was the difference between 2014 and 2022, because 2014 was when Russia first invaded Ukraine. People deflate that a lot. People think that it is in 2022, but rather 2022 was just the escalation of the war. So that's the main piece of history that I'm focusing on, and I'm trying to focus more on the human story. But yes, very important regardless.
I guess this is just a general tip, which I myself need to adhere to as well. But I feel like it's a journey. Like, I feel like it's hard for us to say, like, you know, taking certain steps will help. But I guess just being open to learning and knowing that there is a lot of entanglement out there, as you mentioned. So we're already halfway there. I guess the other part is just keep trying. I'm with you on that. It's difficult.
Hi, I'm Srijan from Northwestern Qatar. First, like it's really interesting the niche topic that you have, especially in terms of like the migrants that you explore here. My question is more on the technicals in terms of like we're thinking of publishing it, like in terms that a lot of these people that you've interviewed are also very vulnerable members of these communities. So there are legal consequences, there's safety, there's jobs and all of that. So how do you see to navigate those things, and what does publishing mean in that aspect? Like what ensures safety for your interviewees?
I can definitely speak to this because, yeah, as I mentioned, the risks are death and violence for some of these people. And I think, honestly, that has very much affected the pre-reporting and reporting stages of this project. And I still think I'm kind of in the reporting stage, just because it can be really unsafe for some people to speak to you, and you really can't just show up at a community center and like knock on the door. You have to like know people, have an introduction. So one thing that happened pretty early on in my pre-reporting is that I realized I would be able to fairly easily speak to some political figures and politicians who have already been out there in the media sphere and in the political sphere. So these aren't people who are kind of necessarily in hiding. What they do and what they advocate for is definitely puts them at risk for different forms of repression, but doesn't necessarily pose the same risks as someone who might be more of a like grassroots activist, or even someone who's more of a, sort of like a militant activist. So I feel like I have better access to those people and can more safely kind of include them in my stories. But something that I'm still dealing with is getting other voices, because I don't want this to be a story that's only composed of the voices of more prominent members of the community. So yeah, something I'm very much struggling with. But I think another note to that is the places that I am hoping to kind of work on these stories with and ideally publish in are all going to be places that are familiar with this region, with these issues, and with the political concerns of the Kurdish community and repression. So I think I really place a lot of trust in both the editors and advice from the Pulitzer Center, but also from those places if I hopefully can get my work published there. They've published Kurdish stories before, and I trust, you know, that as well. So leaning on editors who have familiarity with the region and the politics.
Oh, sorry, Ella.
No, sorry, I'll be really quick. I had my interviewees sign a consent form, and I was just fully transparent with them off the bat, and so they agreed to it before.
All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and close it there just due to our timing. So let's give our panelists a round of applause. And I'm going to make some closing announcements. So if you'll just sit tight for a couple more minutes, then I promise we'll get some fresh air. But, okay, so many announcements incoming. While I have the attention of so many of our reporting fellows, we just wanted to briefly plug our current fellowship opportunity. This is open to current students and also recent graduates of all of our campus partner schools. So I know some of our fellows are still in school. Some of y'all have graduated. Even if you've graduated, you're still eligible for this opportunity. There's more information on our website, but we're looking for proposals on specifically stories relating to mental well-being, mental health in the U.S. Not due until mid-November. So just wanted to quickly make you aware of this opportunity. And also, you don't only have to have one fellowship. Ariana has had multiple fellowships and maybe others. So yeah, please consider applying for that. Now back to Washington Weekend. I just wanted to encourage everyone to look around, consider these people who you've spent a weekend with. Hopefully you've made some new friends, made some new connections. Hopefully you learned something new, or got to go deeper into a topic you already knew about and were passionate about. I always love this event because I hear from our alums that the connections do continue after Washington Weekend. I think that's another thing I want to tell you guys is that the conversations, don't have to stop here when we're cutting you off during the Q&A. You can keep, I feel like some group chats have formed during the weekend or even before. So please keep those conversations going. Please keep in touch with us. We love to stay in touch with our alums. Also, a lot of you still have to publish on the website, so please keep in touch for that reason, because we want to get your stories out there. Yeah, we would love to keep hearing from you about that. So now, just a few thank yous before I move on to some logistics. First, just want to thank our various faculty campus partners who have joined us throughout the weekend. Some of our contacts that we work with in our campus consortium network have been here listening to the presentations and supporting their students. So we really appreciate your attendance. Please come back again. We'd love to see you at future Washington weekends. Also, shout out to the family members who joined us this weekend. I know there's some in the audience. I'm really glad that you could join us and get to see your loved one present. Now to the team who made all this happen. First, I want to shout out Ash. He made sure that this slideshow ran seamlessly. I really think it was seamless. The slides, they were running, All of our videos played. We had great sound. Also, thank you to our AV support, Ken, who was in the back there. Dealing with all of the sound levels and all of us, using many microphones so we could hear each other. Our video team, Mark and Phil, who were on either side here, capturing the presentations and also some great B-roll footage that you'll see in a highlights video to be coming in the next few weeks. Along that note, Daniel, our multimedia leader back there, who had a ton of support from Grace, who was taking photos, capturing the whole weekend. Our teammate Lucy, who was back there. Lucy designed the tote bags that you guys all got. And she was also focusing on keeping our Instagram story populated. So follow @Pulitzer Center if you haven't already. We also had a lot of social media support from afar from our colleague Alonso, who maybe will eventually watch this recording, so shout out to Alonso. He was tweeting or posting on X, I guess it's not Twitter anymore, posting all the things on social media throughout the weekend. Morgan, our amazing intern back there. Morgan just came into town from Chicago and jumped right in and helped and just really made this weekend so much easier. So shout out to Morgan. Thank you for being such a team player. I know we also have a few Pulitzer team members here. I see Jess over there and Flora. They came just to show support for y'all and listen in to your presentations. My teammate on the Campus Consortium program, Ann Peters, is back there. Just another person who provided general support. Also on the Campus Consortium and outreach team, I think she spoke to you earlier about staying in touch for outreach presentations in the future. Michaela, who's in the back there. And then on my team, I of course need to shout out that our director, Karima, successfully attended her first Washington weekend. So happy to have you on our team. And of course, my teammate, Jazzy, who just did so much. Jazzy was one of the masterminds of the scavenger hunt that y'all went on. She like walked the route herself and just, organized all the food. She just was all hands on deck, an amazing, amazing teammate throughout this experience. And lastly, I want to thank the reporting fellows. I'm so proud of you guys. I want you to give yourselves a round of applause. Soak in the moment. You've presented. You're done. You don't have to be at this podium anymore. I'm a little nervous right now, so I know how you feel.
This is a completely unscripted moment. Josiah and Lily, please come forward.
Hello. I feel like everyone knows why we're up here except for a very few amount of people. So I'm going to cackle real quick and I'm going to force you to stay up here and apologize. The 2024 Pulitzer Fellows would like to give a special thank you to everyone who did this. Like, seriously, y'all are amazing. Especially that exact 6.5 mile walk yesterday. We did check the steps. We have some special things for some special people. First up is, of course, Miss Libby over here.
We just want to say thank you to Libby. What I love about Libby is her her response to emails is always head on. Like, if I'm in an emergency, I'll email Libby. So we just want to say thank you so much for doing this.
So we have something for you. For those of you either who have not seen it or were not involved in the special little yoga poses we were all doing to hide from these, all of the Pulitzer Center Fellows signed a special card with Washington on it with a special thank you for giving us this amazing weekend. So you can remember us forever and all the emails we have sent you. They will forever be in your inbox. You can't get rid of us. Next up is Jazzy. If you could come up to the front, please, ma'am. This feels like The Price is Right.
What I love about Jazzy is Jazzy will have a mask on and you'll still see the brightest smile. Thank you. Next up, although we coordinated with you to do this, we want to invite Director Karima. Yeah. We want to thank you.
We'd like to clarify, she did not, in fact, go on the 6.5 mile hike with us as we decided to do this, but she is, in fact, and part of us being here with this mic, giving you a really fun commentary.
And next up, we want to thank the person that laughed at all our corny jokes and all our Nicki Minaj lyrics. We want to thank Phil. Is that tears I'm seeing there?
Some things we love about Phil is he did, in fact, do the 6.5 mile walk with us. I will keep saying it's 6.5 miles because it, in fact, was. Also giving us some commentary on Washington itself. As he was listening to all of us and our silliness together, we did do a little Nicki Minaj for him. Also, he was in shock. Also, him having to deal with me screaming about Lime scooters for 3 hours yesterday. I apologize, but I really don't. I will be writing one in like 30 minutes. If you need a video, I will email it to you.
One more thing. We know Kim isn't here with us today, so we just would like to ask you to let her know that we rode our own camels in Washington this weekend. And Emma, you can...
Yeah, announcement.
So sorry that we've hijacked this. Really quick announcement. If you are not already on the WhatsApp group chat, find me. But Jazzy has the link. Amazing. And Jazzy can send out the link. But yeah, just find me. Jazzy will send it out. We're good.
Yeah. Anything else? Thank you guys. I'm really looking forward to seeing the footage in the highlights reel. Yeah, that was incredibly kind. Our team just, yeah, as I've said over and over, really appreciates your just enthusiasm for this weekend. And I think, yeah, it was all of you, all of our attendees who just made it a special time to remember. So much gratitude to each and every one of you.